Imagine this. You walk into a room full of powerful people. CEOs, politicians, influencers, every one of them calculating, posturing, hiding their true intentions behind layers of charm and confidence. And yet, within 30 seconds, you've already mapped the entire power dynamic. You know who's pretending, who's insecure, who's hungry, who's hiding fear behind arrogance. You speak little, but you see everything. You influence without showing your hand. You win without appearing to play. That's the essence of the intelligence hack Machiavelli never wanted you to know. Because it's not about being cold or cruel or manipulative. It's about seeing reality as it is, not as people want you to see it, not as society packages it, but as it really exists in all its raw, fragile, brutal honesty. And once you start seeing like that, you stop moving like everyone else. But you become a different kind of player.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Now let's be clear. This video isn't about becoming some sociopath or master manipulator. This is deeper. This is about unlocking a form of intelligence that's both ancient and dangerous. It's the kind of intelligence that doesn't just memorize facts, it decodes people. That's what Machiavelli mastered, and why, ironically, he buried the most powerful parts of it beneath layers of irony, metaphor, and coded language. Because he knew if ordinary people ever learned this, power structures would collapse. So let's ask the real question. What if you could learn to read people the way Machiavelli read kings, popes, and generals? What if you could apply that insight not to some medieval court, but to your job, your relationships, your everyday life? Would you still play by the same rules? The truth is, we've been taught to believe that intelligence is about logic, reason, and academic success. But Machiavelli knew better. He understood that real intelligence, the kind that wins, is rooted in perception, awareness, the ability to interpret what others miss. He called it virtue, not virtue in the moral sense, but a kind of strategic excellence, the ability to shape fate, not by brute force, but by understanding the currents of power and riding them like a master sailor. And here's the hack: people aren't complicated. They're predictable, but only if you stop listening to what they say and start watching how they say it. Watch their eyes, their posture, the micro-expressions that flicker before the mask settles, the hesitation before a lie, the overcompensation after a failure, the silence that screams louder than words. Machiavelli never wrote a manual on this because he couldn't. It's not something you teach in steps. It's something you sense. But to sense it, you have to unlearn what society teaches you. That people are honest, that words mean truth, that power is earned by merit. No, power is taken. Influence is performed. And most of what people say is camouflage. That's the first layer you have to pierce, not with cynicism, but with clarity. Let me ask you something. How often do you believe someone just because they sound confident? Or trust a person just because they smile? Or assume someone is kind because they're nice? Machiavelli would laugh at that. He'd remind you that Caesar was charming, Genghis Khan was generous, and some of the most dangerous people in history were exceptionally polite. But the lesson? Never judge on surface. Judge on patterns. Now imagine you're in a conversation. You're not just reacting, you're observing. You're building a mental map tracking ego, fear, insecurity, ambition. You're calibrating your responses. You say less. You reveal little. And because of that, you become a mirror. People start revealing themselves to you without even realizing it. That's the power Machiavelli hinted at, and the power of strategic silence. He wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." But what people miss is the nuance. He didn't mean be a tyrant. He meant understand what people respond to. Some follow love, some follow fear, some follow respect. The intelligent person, they adapt. They don't moralize. They read the room and become what the moment demands. So why is this dangerous? Because once you learn to see people this way, you can no longer be manipulated like before. You hear the subtext beneath compliments. You detect the envy behind praise, the fear behind aggression. And suddenly people can't control you. They can't predict you. You become a variable. A question mark. That's threatening. That's powerful. But there's a cost. Once you see the game, you can't unsee it. You start noticing how often people lie to themselves, how much of society is theater, how strategies replace sincerity. And here's the philosophical blow. You start wondering if you are playing a role too. If all this intelligence, this perceptiveness, is just another mask, another performance. So let me ask you, what happens when your intelligence becomes so sharp that it cuts through your own identity? That's the Machiavellian paradox. He didn't just teach rulers how to govern, he forced them to confront the truth that ruling others always begins with ruling yourself. The real hack isn't how to manipulate others. It's how to become immune to manipulation. And that requires brutal self-awareness. You have to know your own ambitions, your fears, your masks. You have to be able to ask yourself, am I being authentic or just strategic? And sometimes the answer hurts. But that's the price of seeing clearly. Because in a world where everyone is acting, the one who's aware of the script can rewrite the story. And that's the intelligence Machiavelli never wanted widely shared. Not because he was evil, but because he knew the masses weren't ready. He feared what would happen if the average person learned to think like a prince. If they stopped obeying appearances and started decoding the hidden rules. So here's the challenge. Are you ready to think like that? Are you ready to detach from the illusions and to watch instead of react? To listen to what people don't say? To become the kind of person who doesn't just survive the game, but sees through it? Because if you are, then this isn't just a philosophy video. It's a weapon. The Invisible Playbook: How to Control Influence Without Ever Being Seen. Let's go deeper. Now that you've seen the game, it's time to learn how to play it without being played. This is where most people fail. They either try to dominate and become obvious, or they retreat and become irrelevant. But what if you could move like smoke, intangible, unreadable, yet always present in the outcome? That's the core of the Invisible Playbook. It's the strategy Machiavelli hinted at, but never fully explained. It's how you control the room without ever commanding it. It's how you win minds without raising your voice. And it's how you become the most powerful person in any situation, not by being seen, but by being impossible to define. This begins with one of the most underrated and misunderstood skills in human history, the art of observation. Not passive watching, not creepy surveillance. I mean active decoding, watching people like a philosopher, like a tactician, like a strategist with a 1,000-year view. When someone speaks, you ask, what are they hiding? What do they want me to think they are? What do they think I want them to be? Most people never get to this layer because they're too busy reacting. But you're not reacting anymore. You're watching the whole chessboard. And when you do that, something magical happens. Everyone else starts playing your game, whether they know it or not. Machiavelli warned that most people are driven by two things: fear and self-interest. That's it. Strip away the labels, the identities, the politics, and that's what remains. So the invisible player uses this to their advantage, not cruelly, but wisely. You don't need to dominate people. You just need to understand what they fear and what they crave. Then, gently, you position yourself as the answer to both. You become useful, you become safe, and slowly, silently, you become indispensable. That's the move. You don't attack the king. You become the advisor no king can function without. But here's the twist. To do this, you must become unknown. The less people understand you, the more control you have. Why? Because people fear what they can't predict, and they respect what they don't fully comprehend. So you learn to speak in layers. You say one thing and mean three. You give people just enough truth to make them feel comfortable, but never enough to let them map your psychology. You let them project their ideals, their fears, their fantasies onto you. And then, without ever lifting a finger, you control how they see you. Let me ask you something. How often do you explain yourself to people who don't deserve the explanation? How often do you feel the need to be understood, validated, seen? Machiavelli would tell you, that's weakness. That's leaking power. The invisible player doesn't need to be understood. They need to be misunderstood in exactly the right way. Because when people misunderstand you, they reveal more about themselves. And that's intel. That's leverage. Now here's where the playbook gets even more ruthless. Influence isn't about pushing, it's about pulling. You don't convince people. You let them convince themselves. You don't argue. You plant ideas like seeds disguised as their own thoughts. This is how power has always worked at the highest level. Kings had advisors. CEOs have speechwriters. Presidents have think tanks. The real movers of history have often been invisible, but silent, strategic, and forgotten by name. So, how do you apply this? Start with your presence. Stop oversharing. Stop narrating your life. Silence isn't just golden, it's strategic. Then, learn to ask questions that reveal more than they seem. When someone says something bold, ask gently, why do you think that is? When someone brags, ask, what made that moment so important to you? These aren't just questions, they're X-rays. They open people without them realizing it. And the more someone opens up to you, the more they trust you, not because they know you, but because they feel known. Machiavelli understood that people don't follow strength, they follow certainty. That's why you must master the calm center, but be the person who doesn't flinch, who doesn't overreact, who doesn't get pulled into drama. That calmness, it's magnetic. It makes people feel safe, and in a chaotic world, safety is more persuasive than brilliance. So when others are loud, be quiet. When they rush, slow down. When they panic, breathe. Let your stillness unsettle them. Let your silence raise questions. That's how you take control without ever raising your hand. And yet, don't mistake invisibility for passivity. The invisible player is always active, just not obvious. You're always listening, always adjusting, always positioning. This is the art of controlled ambiguity. You never define yourself fully, because the moment people can define you, they can dismiss you. They can place you in a box, and once you're boxed, you're predictable. And if you're predictable, you're powerless. So how do you remain undefined? Simple. You contain multitudes. You allow contradictions to coexist. You can be kind and cold, thoughtful and unyielding, present and distant. You don't need to resolve these tensions, you embody them. Because real intelligence isn't about being consistent. It's about being adaptable without ever losing yourself. But that raises a haunting question. If you're always adapting, always performing, always strategizing, who are you really? And that's where the invisible playbook becomes more than just a tactic. It becomes a mirror. Because the deeper you dive into influence, the more you begin to realize the ultimate form of power isn't control over others. It's awareness of yourself, and that requires more courage than any manipulation ever could. Because to be truly unseen, you have to first see everything, especially your own ego, your need to win, your hunger for recognition, your fear of irrelevance. Only when you master those can you move through the world without being enslaved by it. That's the final layer Machiavelli hinted at but never said outright. Because it's not just about ruling kingdoms. It's about ruling the self. It's not just about surviving politics. It's about transcending them. And once you do that, you're no longer just playing the game. You become the game. The Shadow Emperor: How to Win Without Power and Lead Without Followers. Now we arrive at the deepest layer of all. You've learned to see the game. You've learned to move through it invisibly. But now we ask, what if you could operate beyond the game entirely? What if you could win without needing recognition, lead without needing loyalty, influence without ever being known? That's the realm of the Shadow Emperor, the one who governs not through title or position, but through presence, and through essence, through gravity. And here's the truth Machiavelli never dared to articulate, because it's too powerful for most people to handle. You don't need a throne to rule. You just need alignment. Alignment with what? With yourself. Because the most dangerous person in the world isn't the one with armies or followers. It's the one who has nothing to prove, who doesn't need applause, who doesn't chase validation. That kind of person cannot be bribed, manipulated, or controlled. And that kind of person becomes the center of gravity in the room because everyone else feels their freedom and wants it for themselves. Here's the paradox. When you stop seeking power, power begins to orbit you. Why? Because true power isn't about dominance. It's about clarity. It's about being so rooted in your purpose, your values, and your vision that the noise of the world can't knock you off balance. That's the power Machiavelli feared in others because it's ungovernable. You can't blackmail it. You can't flatter it. You can't threaten it. It just is. And it's terrifying to those who depend on control. But how do you get there? How do you become a shadow emperor in a world obsessed with spotlights? You begin by dismantling the idea that leadership requires followers. But it doesn't. Influence doesn't require attention. It requires depth. You don't need a platform, you need a philosophy. A way of being so coherent, so consistent, that people can feel it in your silence. When you walk into a room, your energy speaks before your mouth ever opens. That's not charisma, that's internal architecture. It's the frequency of a person who has mastered themselves. Let me ask you, how often are your actions aligned with your principles? How often does your behavior match your inner truth? Because the more aligned you are, the less resistance you carry, the less noise you emit. And the more you move through life like a current, subtle but unstoppable. That's the essence of the Shadow Emperor. No crown, no cape, just conviction, just clarity. Machiavelli wrote for princes who feared losing power. But this level of mastery is for those who have nothing to lose. Because they already own the only thing that can't be taken, self-mastery. And once you arrive there, you realize something profound. You don't need to win against people. You win through them. You don't convert others, you embody something so rare that they want to follow without ever being asked. This is not manipulation. This is magnetism, and it cannot be faked. From that solitude, your mind sharpens, your vision clarifies. You stop reacting to life and start designing it. You stop chasing outcomes and start shaping environments. You stop looking for the next move and start thinking 3 layers above the board. And suddenly, you're not just surviving reality. You're architecting it. And here comes the final twist, the Machiavellian reversal no one expects. Once you master this way of being, people begin to assign you power. They project leadership onto you. They seek your approval. They follow your silence. And if you're not careful, they'll try to crown you, because people are always looking for someone to follow. But the Shadow Emperor doesn't need a crown. They don't need a title. Because they've already won the only kingdom that matters, themselves. So here's the question you must face now. Are you ready to lead without followers? Are you ready to influence without needing credit? Are you ready to become so disciplined, so internally aligned, that the world recognizes your leadership without you ever having to announce it? Because that's what Machiavelli feared most, not the prince who ruled by fear, but the philosopher warrior who ruled by presence, the one who moved in shadows but shaped empires, the one who knew that the highest intelligence is not domination but discernment, the one who knew that the greatest victory is not over others but over the self. That's the ruthless intelligence hack Machiavelli never wanted shared. Not because it's corrupt, but because it's incorruptible. And now that you've seen it, the question is simple. What will you do with it? Will you use it to manipulate or to liberate? Will you use it to play the game or to transcend it? Will you become a player or a shadow emperor? The choice is yours. And that's the philosophy nobody else is brave enough to teach.